Just want to ask you to pray for Pastor Lolly. She has a throat infection, and she can't be with us today, so please pray for her. In 2010, Martin was on holiday in Cornwall. And while walking in a car park with a friend, he suddenly felt weird, had cardiac arrest, fell to the ground, and died, age 47. Two strangers noticed what happened and stopped and asked his friend. And as they asked his friend, they got out of the car and they went around and they saw him lying on the ground, and they immediately began to work. And what Martin didn't know was both these two strangers were consultants from Plymouth's A&E department. And the driver happened to have a portable defibrillator, the only piece of equipment that could save him and that could bring him back to life. And after 3.5 minutes, they got him back from being dead to consciousness. And immediately he was airlifted to hospital. Martin later learned from the people that were working on him at Truro Hospital that this consultant, this very same one that helped save his life, rang up every day to find out how he was. See, the NHS isn't that bad. Apparently, Martin's chance of surviving without the intervention of this stranger and this particular piece of equipment was 0. And so once he returned home to Bristol, Martin tracked down the consultant and obviously had a very emotional phone conversation with him. Turns out the consultant was also the chairman of a Southwest charity who raises money and to provide life-saving equipment to volunteers, which is why he had the defibrillator in his car. And so Martin has this to say. He says, "This incident with a stranger didn't just change my life, it gave me my life. Now I'm also hoping to pass it down the line." These are the stories you kind of hear over Christmas, isn't it? It reminds me of something I read this week, and I want to share it with you. Let's put it on the screen. It's written by Ty Gibson in a piece called Infinite Empathy, and he says the following. He says, "Emotions are a mysterious phenomenon. Think about it. A person's smile has the power to make you feel something pleasant inside, isn't it? Have you noticed that? When somebody smiles at you, it makes you feel good. Doesn't it? It does. So let's smile. A person's tears can throw you into tears with them even before you know why they're crying. Have you experienced that before? I have. The mere fact that another human being is happy or sad somehow impacts our own state of being. Emotions are invisible links of identification with the experiences of others." How strange. Or maybe not. Actually, the fact that we are emotional beings tells us something astonishing and wonderful. We can reason it through like this, he says. If God is love, and if love is the capacity to empathize with others, well then we are most like God when we feel the feelings of others. Wow. Isn't that powerful? It is also true then that we are least like God when we are insensitive to what others are experiencing. That's hard, isn't it? It's hard to know that. So as we are facing down another year, and as the hourglass of 2017 is running empty, and as the hourglass of Earth's history is running empty, I wonder if there is a sense in which we can take the words, that are found in Christ's Object Lessons, page 415, seriously. Notice what it says. It says, the last rays of merciful light, the last message of mercy to be given to the world, is a revelation of His, that's God's character of love. The children of God are to manifest His glory in their own life and character. They are to reveal what the grace of God has done for them. And so basically she is saying that at the end of Earth's history, in these last few moments of life for many of us, maybe in those last few moments of Martin's life, the most important message the world needs to hear is the revelation of God's character of love. And how are we to do it? She says, well, our mission is to manifest this. Our mission is to manifest His glory. That's love to the world. And we are able to do this as imitators of Christ. When we live connected with Christ and our lives and our characters reveal the grace that God has done in our lives. And so with this in mind, let's go to this passage that was partly read to us by Johan. Thank you, Johan. Isaiah chapter 56. Take your Bibles and open it up to chapter 56. And let us explore just for a moment a few of these verses, the first 7 verses in Isaiah chapter 56. At first, it might seem strange why we pick this messianic vision that Isaiah had to talk about this morning. But hopefully, as we go through it, we will come to this sort of emphasis, this idea that our characters, our lives, are to reveal the grace that God has done in us and through us. Isaiah chapter 56, and let's pick it up there in verse 1. We start reading from verse 1, and I'm going to go through it in the New King James Version this morning. And it says the following. It says, thus says the Lord. So God speaking through the pen of Isaiah, He's saying, keep justice and do righteousness, for my salvation is about to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. And so if we just take you for a moment, just look at this and recognize that this is a messianic prophecy. And what we mean by that is it's a vision, a dream that's given to Isaiah. He pens this down as this points forward to the future, to when Jesus is going to come, the Messiah, and salvation will be received. Salvation will come to the world. And so Isaiah is saying, sit up, take notice. He says, because soon God is going to do something in human history. He's coming. Verse 2 says, blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who lays hold on it. Well, blessed is who? Who does what? Well, blessed is the person who does justice, as verse 1 says. Blessed is the person who does do righteousness. And blessed is he who takes hold of this promised salvation. That's what he's saying. And this kind of reminds me of that very familiar admonition in Micah chapter 6, verse 8. It's one of those verses we kind of grow up as children if you grow up in an Adventist church. Micah says, He has shown you, O man, what is good. So God has shown them what is good. What is good? What is good? Come on, say it with me. You know it. You know this one. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God? In other words, what Micah is saying is our lives, our characters are to reveal the grace of God, the way in which God has revealed His love through us so that others can experience the revelation of Jesus and that others can experience the relation of God's character of love. Let's finish verse 2. Verse 2 said, blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who lays hold on it, who keeps from defiling the Sabbath and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Let me just put a note in here. We're going to come back to this next year when we look at the Sabbath in our sermon series next year. So the question we kind of have to ask ourselves here, just ask yourself this question and go think about it. What has the Sabbath got to do with doing justice and righteousness? And laying hold of salvation before the birth of Jesus Christ, because he's talking here into a community of people. He's talking into the hearts of the Jewish nation. Well, what a powerful thing that happened this week. Talk about causing chaos in the world, Anyway, we won't go there this morning. Somehow, according to this messianic prophecy, the Sabbath is tightly interlinked to to this idea of salvation through Jesus Christ. But we'll talk about it next year, so come back next year. Verse 3, do not let the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, the Lord has utterly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, here I am, a dry tree. So here we find in verse 3 that this vision is divided into two groups of people, the foreigners and my people. And so when we go through the narrative of the Old Testament, we can infer that the idea of my people refers to the Jewish nation. And the foreigner refers to all of those people who are not Jews, all the Jews. And then we have the eunuch here in verse 3. Now, who's the eunuchs? Well, the eunuchs are in a way separated as well from the Jewish nation, from the Israelites. So they kind of fall in the category of the foreigner. And the eunuch is saying here, he says of himself, I'm like a dry tree. Well, what does that mean? Well, when we go back into the Old Testament, we will see that the idea, the symbol of a green, a living tree by living waters refers symbolically to the Israelites, refers symbolically to the Jewish nation. And so in a way, what the eunuch here is saying, he's saying, well, I'm not like them. I'm not like this chosen group who they are green and living trees. No, I'm separated from them. I'm a dry tree. And in a way, the foreigner feels the same thing. They feel separated. It's a them and an us scenario. And God is saying, no. That's not how it should be. Don't think like that. Don't see yourself like that. Don't feel like that. God is saying in this verse. Why? Why shouldn't they think like that? Why should they not feel like that? Why should they not see themselves as them versus us? Well, look at verse 4. Verse 4 says, for thus says the Lord, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, there it is again, and choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant. Wow. Notice what's happening here. God is about to pronounce a blessing on the foreigner and the eunuch. A blessing on who? A blessing on those who are perceived to be separate. A blessing on those who are perceived to be not in the in group, not in the us. And God's about to pronounce a blessing on them because they keep the Sabbath and hold fast to His commandment. This is really interesting because when we come to our time, by the way, today, most Christians see the Sabbath as a Jewish thing, don't they? Most Christians see it that way. The Sabbath, well, that's a Jewish thing. But really, when we look at this is a messianic prophecy. This is way before Jesus' time. And in a way, what God is saying here through Isaiah, He is saying that the established church that is to come when Jesus comes and He establishes this new church, their thing is going to be the Sabbath. That's what He's saying. Why? Because it's a divine institution given for the blessing of all of humanity. Not just some, but all. Anyway, I'm going off topic. Let's get back to verse 5. Even to them, this is the foreigners and the eunuchs, verse 5. Even to them, the foreigners and the eunuchs, I will give in my house and within my walls a place and a name. This is the blessing, by the way. Better, and this name, this place I will give them will be better than that of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Wow. This is really powerful. Just think about this. Who are the sons and the daughters here? It's my people. It's God's children. It's the Jews. And so this messianic prophecy is projecting forward. It's projecting forward to Jesus' time. And so when we think forward to Jesus' time, we see Jesus comes. Jesus initiates this promise of salvation. And God becomes man. He's incarnated in the flesh of Jesus as a human being. He becomes with us, God with us. And then He performs His redemption act on the cross. He is resurrected from the dead. Thereby He gains this victory. And as we said last time, He's sitting on the right hand of God. And by meaning that He's sitting on the right hand of God, it means He's already gained the victory. The victory has been won. And God comes and He says to you and me, now in this time, you and me, the eunuch, the foreigner, He's saying, not only are you not a dry tree, not only are you not part of the people, but you will be more than sons and daughters. What? Yes, you and I. By the way, we're the foreigners. Unless you were born Jewish, then I don't know, maybe. But you're still a foreigner. It says you will be more than sons and daughters. Why? Because God never intended for Israel to be a special club of believers who will be saved and everybody else will be lost. God never intended for that. God never intended to call them out of Egypt and just call them out of Egypt so that they can just be with Him, just them. God never intended it for it to be an us versus them. God never intended to call them out of the land of Egypt just so that they could be a special and holy people. No, He called them out of the land of Egypt so that they could be a special and holy people who will live God's message, God's character of love into the lives of others, so that through God's acts of mercy and God's act of grace in their life, others are able to be brought into God's fold. And so the specialness, the peculiarness, because we like to use that word peculiar, but this idea that they were special, this idea that they were peculiar, was they were special and peculiar because of the mission that they had. Not because of who they were. They were not better. But they had a mission, a special mission. And this mission was that if you live by my principles and if you live by my character and you model that to the world and they come into my fold, this is what I want. I want everybody to be saved, God says. So this is a warning. It's a warning to us this morning. As the hourglass of 2017 is running empty, and the hourglass of Earth's history, we are not primarily called, listen carefully, I'm trying to choose my words carefully. We are not primarily called to be gatekeepers of knowledge. We are called to be revealers of God's character of love. Did you get that? Did that make sense the way that I worded it? We are called to be revealers of God's character. And so when we are called to be revealers of God's character, we are called to partake in this mission that God had originally given to this chosen people. But it was not just meant for them. I think in a way God wanted us all to be Israelites at the end of the day. And so when we humble ourselves, listen carefully, when we humble ourselves and we set aside our selfish needs to be more important than the person next to us, or to be more important than the person who sits on the other side of the room, who has said something or who has done something to us 20 years ago that we're still bitter towards, if that is the way in which we come together as a community, then it is you and I, not the he and she, but the you and I who are paralyzed. We become paralyzed, and we become paralyzed to reveal the character of God's love. So listen up. It's much easier to be compassionate. These are our values, by the way. Compassion, love, generosity. It's much easier to be compassionate and loving and generous to the stranger in the street than to the brother or the sister who has hurt us. It's much easier. It's much easier. It reminds me of Jesus' words, Matthew 23, verse 15. These are hard words. Jesus says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, and when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves." In other words, what Jesus is saying here is he's saying, the point that I'm trying to make here is that you go out and you evangelize. Or what is the point for you to go out and evangelize if you're simply bringing those individuals into a community that is totally misrepresenting my character of love? Now, I'm not saying we're that community, okay? Don't hear me wrong. But there's a danger in being that community. And that's why Jesus says to his disciples, he says to his disciples there at the end, one of his last messages, probably one of the most important messages he gives to his disciples in John chapter 13, verse 35. He says, by this way, everybody will know that you are my disciples. If you have love for who? Just love for who? So he's talking to his disciples, and by talking to disciples, he's also talking to the larger audience of Jews, and he says, by this, everybody will know that you are my disciples. If you have love for the Samaritan, and if you have love for the Philistine, and if you have love for the Hittites. Is that what he's saying? No. If you have love for one another. And this is interesting. Jesus doesn't say, by this all will know that you are my disciples, if they have love for you. But if you have love for one another. In other words, Jesus puts the onus on the disciples. He doesn't put the onus on the person that has done something or said something to hurt me, but he's put the onus on me to take the first step. It's on me to take the first step. All right, we've gone completely off the road. Yeah, sorry. Back to Isaiah chapter 56. So notice God calls Israel. He calls them as a special people, as a holy people. Why? Because of their mission. Not because they're better than the others, but because of he could have called anybody. But he calls them because of the mission that he has. A mission, a special mission. They were peculiar, they were unique, they were a special holy people because if they lived by God's principles and if they modeled that to the world, they would bring the world into the fold. So God is saying, I'm not just going to bring you in, I'm not just going to give you a better name than sons and daughters, but I'm going to give you an everlasting name and you will never be able to be cut off. By the way, this kind of takes you back to that vision of Daniel in chapter 9 when he talks about the Messiah who will be cut off. Anyway, that's another conversation. Back to verse 6. Also the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord. That's the character of the Lord, to love the character of the Lord, to be his servants, everyone who keeps from defiling the Sabbath and holds fast my covenant. Even them I will bring into my holy mountain. I will bring them into my fold, and I will make them joyful in the house of prayer. What will God make of us? He will make of us joyful people. Joyful people. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. For my house, we know this phrase very well, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for who? For all nations. And now most biblical scholars understand this last sentence, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. Most biblical scholars understand this to refer to the key characteristic of the early Christian church. This is what it will be. It will be a place for all nations. So notice that by stating the obvious promises, because what Isaiah is doing here is he's stating the obvious promises and blessings of God to the foreigners and to the eunuchs. By stating the obvious blessings and promises to the foreigners and to the eunuchs, like you and me, he's also silently stating the obvious condemnation of the attitude of Israel. So listen up. Let's consider the practical application of this. We run the risk. We can insist on remaining, and I've said this before, in our own Adventist citadel, our own little Adventist quarantine. We can stay in our own cocoon and talk our own language, mainly to ourselves, and stay in our own culture, in our own context, in our own situation. And yes, while we do that, some people will come. Some people will come, and every now and then someone will come, and they will come across this great valley into this thing called Adventism with all its idiosyncrasies. And it will happen. People will come. People will come. But it will also sometimes paint over the internal back door many of our children use. Why? I think that there's an element in which our children choose to leave when they persistently see us selfishly withholding compassion, love, and generosity towards each other. No one is able to be truly compassionate, truly loving, truly generous, and not forgive that person at the same time. You can't marry the two together. If we think that we are compassionate and loving and generous, and yet at that same time we are unable to forgive that person and reconcile, we are deceiving ourselves. But we are not just deceiving ourselves, we are robbing ourselves of the total blessings that God speaks of here in Isaiah 56. And we're not just robbing ourselves of these blessings, but we're also robbing ourselves of a genuine rest in God. Why do we do that to ourselves? I want to share with you another warning. It's not intended to be warnings this morning. It's going to end good, I think. So here we go. Psalm 66, verse 16 to 20. We'll put it on the screen. It says, come and hear. David is speaking here. He's excited. He wants us to know what he has experienced. He says, come and hear, all who fear God, and I will declare what he has done for my soul. He's saying, come, listen. I want you to know what I have experienced and what it means for me. He says, I cried to him with my mouth, and he was extolled with my tongue. In other words, I cried out to God. You kind of get this idea that he's been praying, and he's been worshiping God. He's been expressing that vividly to God. And then it says, verse 15, if I regard iniquity in my heart, the NIV says, if I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord will not hear. And then he says in verse 19, he says, but he's excited, he's happy. He's filled with that joy that Isaiah 56 speaks of. But certainly God has heard me. He has attended to my voice of my prayer. Blessed be God who has not turned away my prayer. So notice David's experience here is his experience is that because he has been able to set aside self, because he has no bitterness in his heart, or his heart's not hardened by being unable to forgive, because he is free from that, he's free to experience the full blessings of God's intent and God's rest. In other words, the power of the choice to experience God's full blessings are in our own hands. It's ours. We can choose. We could choose to cherish sin, hold on to the bitterness, withhold forgiveness, and lose out on the full experience of blessings, which brings with it a sense of surety, a sense of certainty. Last week we spoke about this idea that sometimes we doubt the fact that we are saved. And God says, you don't have to doubt it. I shared this passage with the church at Week of Prayer. You've got to come to Week of Prayer. Prayer meeting, not week. You've got to come to prayer meeting on a Wednesday night. You're missing out. It was wonderful this week because Carlton and Judy, they were leading out, and I was in my corner preparing something, and they were in their corner preparing to lead out. We didn't talk to each other, but I tell you, when we came together, I can tell you God was in that. God was in that. And it's amazing how it came together. And I shared this idea that we sometimes doubt the fact that we're saved. Listen, where's God? Where's Jesus sitting, by the way? Where's Jesus sitting at this moment? According to Scripture, he is sitting at the right hand of God. In other words, he's gained favor from God. He's already gained the victory. What are we doubting? Why are we so quick to doubt? You know why? Because we indulge the self. We indulge the self. Because we indulge the self, we rob ourselves. We rob ourselves of the true blessings of Christmas. But if we are willing to let go of cherished sin, the dictionary's definition of a cherished sin is a grudge. So if you were wondering what is a cherished sin, it's a grudge. By the way, it kills you as well. And I think, Torben, you can affirm that it kills you, physically causes you illness. But if you let go of iniquity, if you let go of bitterness, if you extend forgiveness and able to rest in God, we will experience what God speaks of here. We will experience the fact that we are not cut off from Him, but we have an everlasting name, and that is that we are children of God. Notice what Counsels for the Church says on page 256. He says, all heaven is interested in the interview between the one who has been injured and the one who is in error. As the erring one accepts the reproof offered in the love of Christ and acknowledges his wrong, asking forgiveness from God and from his brother, the sunshine of heaven fills his heart. Now let me just give you a warning. It's going to snow tomorrow, they say. Not in Watford. So if you want snow, come to Welling Garden City. They say it's going to snow higher up in Hertfordshire. But how about sitting, looking out the window, seeing some snow, and knowing that inside your heart is filled with the sunshine of heaven? The controversy is ended, she says. Friendship and confidence is restored. I love this. The oil of love. You know, they say sometimes when your ring gets stuck on your ring finger, you got to do a little bit of olive oil in there, and then it just wiggle it. You've heard that? Some of the men, you've had to try that, haven't you? All right. I need sticky tape to keep mine there. It's falling off. But this idea that the oil of love removes the soreness caused by the wrong. Wow. The Spirit of God binds heart to heart. And this is beautiful, there is music in heaven over the union brought about. There's a song in the air, as we're going to sing pretty soon. There's music in heaven over the union brought about as those thus united in Christian fellowship offer prayer to God and pledge themselves to deal justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Great blessings comes to them. And so listen up, God desires every single one of us here this morning. God desires every single one in Watford. God desires every single one in this world to be part of His fold, to experience His full blessings. This means this. This means, therefore, that when we come together, and when I look around us here, I can see this. When we come together in a community that looks really diverse, a community of people who come with different cultural upbringings, different family quirks. And let me tell you, I've got some family quirks, different Christmas traditions and language. When my wife and I got married, man, we had some issues at Christmas we had to sort out because the traditions were a little bit different, you know. But we kindly did it. I just gave in and we just went her way, you know. But have you noticed that? Christian, Charlotte, you're gonna experience that, man. Two traditions coming together. I tell you, it's good luck figuring it out. But notice that when we come together, we bring these cultural upbringings, these different traditions, these different individual quirkiness of ourselves, and also we bring with ourselves together as a community our different baggages. And when we do that, we are bound to step on each other's toes. It's bound to happen. I mean, if I can step on my own kids' toes and my wife's toes, it's bound to happen in church. True? True? Yeah, it's bound to happen. But in the same breath, if we're willing to live as forgiving people, if we're willing to forgive, reconcile among each other within this community of faith, do you know what message that tells the world? That God is found, His favor is found amongst us. And I tell you, I want to be part of that community. And not only is God's favor found amongst us, but the blessings will be more abundant and more meaningful. So therefore, I ask you one thing this morning. I ask you to give the gift of forgiveness this Christmas. You know, that gift of forgiveness will be more important than any present you can give them. I ask you to give the gift of forgiveness this Christmas, and by so doing, when we do that, we manifest to the world and we reveal to the world God's glory and His character of love. So may it be that because of our gift of forgiveness this Christmas, may it be that there is music in heaven and a song in the air. God bless you.